The first scream came not from pain but from cloth. Dinah heard it in her mind as the fabric tore, not the fabric itself, but the sound of her daughter's life being ripped away. She had just been handed the paper. A slip of ink and arithmetic, folded once, and pressed into her palm as if it were a spool of thread. On it, Sarah's name. Her daughter listed among cattle and debts, scheduled for auction. A girl barely 9 years old, bright as morning, reduced to an entry in a ledger. The air in the sewing room was hot and close. The fireplace ticked with the last of its coals. Around Dinah, dresses hung like silent witnesses, gowns of emerald, sapphire, ivory, each one painstakingly stitched by her hand for a mistress who never noticed the artistry, only the fit. The dresses swayed slightly, as though the very house breathed around her. Dinah did not cry. Not here. Her tears belonged to the fields, to the shadows where grief could be swallowed whole. Here, in the big house, she kept her hands steady, her face quiet, her breath measured. She placed the folded paper beside the pincushion, as if it were another tool of her trade. Then she threaded her needle with the same precision as always. But in her chest, a storm gathered. Outside, the plantation was quiet, wrapped in winter frost. Horses shifted in their stalls. Somewhere far off, Solomon's hammer struck iron in steady rhythm. Ruth hummed to lull a feverish child in the quarters. The world continued its cruel order. Only Dinah stood still, her hand hovering mid-stitch, knowing that by morning her child could be gone forever. Her mind searched for escape, none came. No petition, no plea, no mercy had ever freed a child once listed. Sarah would be sold, swallowed by the South, by miles of road and chains. Unless Dinah rewrote the order herself. Her eyes traveled to the shelves where scraps of fabric were folded. Beneath them, hidden in a cigar box, lay what no one knew she had, small notes filled with sketches of plants, copied letters from books, fragments of recipes passed in whispers. Knowledge she had stolen stitch by stitch, letter by letter, long after the house had gone to sleep. Her fingers brushed the notes as though they were scripture. She remembered nights crouched by candlelight, learning from Ruth's careful voice, the letters like keys opening doors inside her. Knowledge was forbidden. Dangerous. But it had also been freedom in the smallest sense. Now, it could become survival. She looked back at the gowns, shimmering in silence. They clung to the room like ghosts. The mistress's emerald silk, draped over a mannequin, gleamed under the lamplight. Margaret Caldwell had tried it on earlier, twirling while Dinah adjusted the hem. The gown had smelled faintly of jasmine perfume, of privilege that never noticed the sweat that stitched its seams. An idea, sharp as a needle point, pierced through Dinah's chest. If cloth could adorn, it could also betray. The body pressed close to fabric all day long. Cuffs kissed wrists. Collars touched the pulse. Waistbands pressed the skin. The intimacy of clothing was more than armor, it was access. And Dinah, the invisible maker of those garments, was the only one who understood that power. Her heart pounded as the thought took shape, what if the same hands that stitched beauty could stitch death? She whispered Sarah's name under her breath, steadying herself. Then she folded her notes back into the box and hid them beneath scraps once more. That night, while the house slept, she sat at the sewing table with only a single lamp burning. She laid out her tools, thimble, scissors, pincushion, thread. Familiar instruments, now soldiers in a secret war. Her hand hovered over the thread as though testing the weight of her decision. Needle never forgets the cloth, Ruth had once told her, warning her not to rush a stitch. Dinah pressed the needle into the cushion. And cloth never forgets the hand, she murmured. In that silence, the plan was born. By dawn, the sewing room was immaculate again. Dresses hung in orderly rows, no sign of rebellion lingering in their folds. Dinah smoothed the emerald gown with her palm, her face composed. From downstairs, Margaret's voice called impatiently for breakfast. Soon she would come to claim the gown, to parade it at some winter gathering. She would twirl before mirrors, smiling at her reflection, unaware of the secret now woven close to her skin. Dinah's hand lingered on the dress a moment longer. The needle, sharp and silent, lay across her palm like a promise. And for the first time since she read the paper, she allowed herself to breathe. The days after Dinah's decision moved like molasses, slow, heavy, suffocating. Each hour was another chance for someone to notice her thoughts had shifted. But no one looked closely. Why would they? To the Caldwells, she was still only the seamstress, a pair of steady hands, bent shoulders, a voice soft enough to fade into the wallpaper. Yet inside her chest, the silence burned. Every morning she dressed Sarah for chores, smoothing the child's braids, tucking her into plain work dresses she had sewn from leftover muslin. Every touch was an act of memorizing. The curve of her cheek. The laugh she tried to hide when Dinah scolded her for skipping steps. Each moment was a thread Dinah clung to, fragile proof that Sarah was still here, not yet taken. But the paper with her name on it still sat folded in Dinah's box. Ink did not fade. In the evenings, when the house quieted, Dinah returned to her secret notes. She studied her crooked sketches of plants, nightshade berries, pokeweed roots, jimson leaves. She traced their outlines with her finger as if learning a child's face. The books she had stolen glances at in Margaret's father's study came back to her in fragments, medicinal warnings, margins filled with Latin words she could barely sound out. She did not need the full science. She only needed patience, precision, and faith that what grew in the woods could be sharpened into a weapon. Once, after supper, Ruth caught her staring too long at the embroidery hoop in her lap. "Your eyes gone far off," Ruth whispered, rocking her sick boy as he coughed against her chest. "Don't let them catch you dreaming. Dreams is what they take first." Dinah smiled faintly, but her lips trembled. "I ain't dreaming. Just sewing." But Ruth's gaze lingered, heavy with suspicion and care. She had raised Dinah as much as the mother Dinah barely remembered. Ruth knew when silence hit a storm. Solomon, too, noticed. In the blacksmith shed, where sparks flew like angry stars, he spoke low as Dinah passed with a basket of mending. "Word is Caldwell's planning another sale," he muttered, hammer striking iron with steady rhythm. "They looking hard at the children. You best be ready." Dinah gripped the basket tighter, her throat aching. "I'm always ready," she said, though her voice cracked like glass. Solomon studied her a moment, eyes narrowing. "Don't do nothing foolish. You sharp, but sharp knives cut the hand that holds them." Dinah said nothing. She walked on, the smell of scorched metal clinging to her dress, his warning echoing in her chest. At night, Dinah began her tests. She could not risk discovery in the sewing room, so she used scraps, thin strips of fabric hidden beneath her bedding. She dipped thread in crushed leaves, let it dry, then pricked her own fingertip lightly, waiting for the sting, the swelling, the fever. Sometimes nothing came. Sometimes she spent the night shivering, teeth rattling against each other while Sarah slept beside her. Each time, she adjusted. A little more. A little less. The work was not unlike sewing itself, trial, error, correction. The needle taught her patience, the plants taught her caution. Both demanded she hold her hand steady no matter how much her heart raced. Meanwhile, the Caldwells prepared for a winter gathering. Margaret fussed over gowns, Samuel over ledgers. The house filled with the clatter of silver being polished, laughter echoing in the halls, boots tracking mud over rugs Dinah would later scrub. To them, the party was an opportunity to display wealth. To Dinah, it was an opportunity of a different kind. Crowds meant distractions. Dresses meant intimacy. And Margaret's emerald silk, now resting in the wardrobe, was waiting. But she could not move too quickly. One mistake, one misstep, and suspicion would fall not only on her but on everyone she loved. Sarah. Ruth. Solomon. The entire quarters would pay. The thought nearly unraveled her resolve. Yet when she closed her eyes, she saw Sarah standing on an auction block, strangers measuring her arms like livestock. That image stitched her back together. One night, after another round of quiet experiments, Dinah sat by the small window of her cabin. The frost made patterns on the glass, veins like threads, reaching and branching. She held her needle up against it, aligning metal with ice. The needle looked small, almost fragile. But she knew better. Cloth bent for it. Thread obeyed it. Flesh could yield to it too. She whispered into the cold air, not sure if she was praying or cursing, "They'll never take her. Not while I got this needle." And in the silence that followed, the frost seemed to listen. The emerald gown shimmered like a jewel when Margaret Caldwell stepped into the parlor. Lamps threw gold across the fabric, catching each fold as she turned before the mirror. "Perfect," Margaret said, lifting her chin, smoothing the sleeves with satisfaction. Dinah stood in the corner, hands clasped, expression unreadable. She had stitched the poison into the seams days earlier, her fingers steady even as her chest quaked. Tonight was the unveiling. Guests filled the room with perfume and laughter, the air heavy with roasted meat and candle smoke. Fiddles struck up a tune. Margaret twirled, her skirts sweeping like a wave. Compliments rained down, on the cut, the color, the way the gown fit like it had been born for her. And through it all, Dinah waited. Hours later, as the party swelled, Margaret's laughter faltered. She pressed her throat as though a necklace had tightened. Samuel scowled, asking if she'd had too much wine. Margaret tried to wave him off, but her hand trembled. By the time she reached the stairs, her steps had turned clumsy. Guests whispered as she gripped the banister, skin pale beneath the lamplight. Sweat beaded along her hairline. Then she collapsed. The room erupted in panic. A doctor was summoned, servants scrambled for water, guests fanned themselves in horror. Samuel barked orders, his voice sharp with fear. Margaret writhed on the carpet, gasping like a fish pulled from water. Her emerald gown clung to her, shimmering, beautiful, and lethal. From the corner, Dinah's heart pounded. Her fingers dug into her apron. She had imagined this moment 100 times, but reality landed differently. It was louder, uglier, more terrifying. She thought she would feel triumph. Instead, her stomach turned, bile rising as Margaret's cries cut through the parlor like a blade. She had done this. With her hands, the same hands that once soothed Sarah to sleep. Margaret did not die that night. The doctor bled her, muttered about nervous fits and weak humors. By dawn, she lay pale and trembling, but alive. Dinah sat outside the sewing room, needle in her lap, unable to sleep. Her mind spun in circles, the risk, the near discovery, the sound of Margaret's choking. The plan had worked, and yet, it hadn't. Sarah found her there in the morning, eyes heavy with worry. "Mama," she whispered, crawling into her lap. "Why you look so sad?" Dinah held her close, pressing her face into her daughter's hair. The scent of wood smoke and soap filled her lungs. She wanted to say, "Because I nearly damned us all." Instead, she said nothing. Silence was safer. That afternoon, Ruth cornered her in the yard. "What you gone and done?" Ruth hissed, voice low but sharp. Dinah froze. "I don't know what you mean. You think I don't see? The way she near died in that dress? Don't play fool with me, girl. I raised you." Dinah's throat tightened. For a moment, she wanted to confess everything, lay the burden down at Ruth's feet. But Ruth's eyes blazed with both love and terror. If she knew too much, it would kill her, too. "I sew what I'm told," Dinah said softly, turning away. But Ruth's voice followed, trembling, needles cut both ways, child. Don't let yours cut Sarah. That night, Dinah returned to her scraps. Her hand shook as she tested another thread, pricking her finger until a bead of blood surfaced. The sight steadied her. The storm inside narrowed to a point. Margaret had lived. That was weakness. If she hesitated, Sarah would still be taken. The choice was no longer about right or wrong. It was survival. Dinah lifted the needle to the lamplight. Its tip gleamed, small and merciless. She whispered, "Next time, it won't miss." And for the first time, her fear twisted into something harder. Something that would not turn back. The Caldwell house did not sleep after Margaret's collapse. Lamps burned through the night. Doors slammed. Horses were saddled and ridden for doctors and remedies. Servants whispered in corners, eyes wide with fear. By morning, the air felt thinner, as though the house itself had begun to doubt its own walls. Margaret, pale and shaken, lay upstairs in her bed, fanned by anxious maids. Samuel prowled the halls like a wolf in a cage, muttering about poison in the food, unwashed hands in the kitchen, curses from the quarters. His suspicion was everywhere and nowhere. Dinah kept sewing. Her needle moved through fabric with its usual precision, but her palm sweated. She knew Samuel's gaze lingered on her longer than before. One wrong breath and she would draw suspicion like a flame draws moths. In the quarters that night, Solomon pulled her aside. The forge's glow lit his face, sweat shining at his temples. "Word is, Master's thinking someone's trying to kill her," he said low. Dinah swallowed hard. "And who you think he'll blame first?" "You. You with your books. Your needle." Solomon's voice broke like iron under too much strain. "Sister, you walking on fire. One slip, we all burn." Dinah stared at him, anger sparking in her chest. "And what you want me to do? Let them sell Sarah? Let her vanish into some swamp field while I sit quiet and stitch dresses for the mistress to twirl in?" Solomon's jaw tightened. His hands shook slightly. "I want you to live. I want your girl to live. But there's more ways than death to fight." Dinah's eyes glistened. "Not for me. Not anymore." She turned before he could answer, her shoulders stiff, her heart cracking under the weight of his fear. Back in the cabin, Ruth was waiting, rocking slow on her stool. Sarah slept curled in a blanket nearby. The lamplight carved lines deep into Ruth's face. "You think you can carry this alone?" Ruth asked softly, without accusation. Dinah lowered her head. "I carry because I must." "And when the needle turns on you? When the master drags you out before the whole county, calls you witch, devil, murderer? What then?" Dinah's hands trembled. She stared at Sarah, her daughter's chest rising and falling in innocent rhythm. "Then at least she won't be on that block." Ruth's eyes filled, and for a long moment the only sound was Sarah's breathing. Finally, Ruth whispered, "Then may God's hand be steadier than yours." The days that followed grew tighter, harsher. Samuel brought in a doctor again, this one more suspicious, examining not just Margaret but the kitchen, the linens, even the dresses. Dinah stood silent as the doctor fingered seams, sniffed collars, muttered about mold and rot. Her stomach clenched so tightly she nearly fainted. But the doctor found nothing. Not yet. Samuel's fury shifted outward. He threatened to whip the kitchen staff, to sell half the quarter to make an example. Fear spread like wildfire. Mothers clutched children tighter. Men bowed lower. Whispers traveled fast, someone in the big house had cursed them all. Dinah carried the weight of those whispers in her chest. She had meant to strike at the Caldwells, not her own people. Every cry, every fearful glance, was another stone added to her burden. Still, when she sat at her sewing table, the needle gleamed under lamplight like a compass pointing one direction only. Forward. The winter gathering had passed, but another event loomed, a speech Samuel was set to give in town, with Margaret at his side. Dinah overheard the plans as she fitted him for a coat. He wanted to speak on the prosperity of Kentucky, the loyalty of his slaves, the future of his family. Her needle slid through cloth, each stitch a heartbeat. A speech meant a stage. A stage meant eyes. A stage meant opportunity. Dinah's decision hardened in that moment. Margaret's collapse had been a stumble. The next act would be a fall. And this time, no doctor would explain it away. The courthouse square was strung with lanterns, each flame trembling against the cold. Townsfolk crowded the steps, boots crunching frost, shawls wrapped tight. Samuel Caldwell stood at the podium, broad-shouldered, confident, his voice rising like he owned not just the land but the air itself. Dinah stood at the back, half-shadowed beneath the gallery. She had carried the final stitches in her basket, the poison thread sewn into Samuel's coat collar where it brushed his neck. Margaret stood beside him in another gown touched by Dinah's hands. Her heart hammered. The crowd's cheer felt distant, muffled, as if she were underwater. She focused on Sarah, who clung to Ruth's skirts near the edge of the square, eyes wide. Dinah had told her, "Stay close to Mama Ruth. Don't move." The speech began, a parade of promises, boasting of prosperity, of loyalty, of the family name destined for greatness. Samuel's hands spread wide, palms glinting in lamplight. Margaret smiled, a porcelain figure beside him. The crowd nodded, murmured approval. Then it happened. Samuel's words faltered. His throat rasped. He coughed once, twice, the sound cracking like dry branches. Margaret reached toward him, confused. He tried to clear his throat, but his voice collapsed into choking. His face flushed deep red, then blanched. The square erupted. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The doctor surged forward. Samuel staggered, gripping the podium with both hands, his speech falling into silence. His body trembled, knees buckling, breath caught as if an invisible hand tightened around his neck. Margaret screamed, clutching him as the crowd surged in panic. Dinah's breath hitched. The world seemed to slow, the lantern flames bending in long arcs. She had imagined this moment, prayed for it, stitched it into every seam, but seeing it unfold before so many eyes was unbearable. Samuel collapsed onto the steps, writhing, his coat twisted around him like a shroud. Margaret knelt, weeping, clutching at his collar, at the very seam Dinah had laced with death. The doctor shouted for air, for water, for prayers. But Samuel's body convulsed, once, twice, and then stilled. The square fell into a hush so deep even the lanterns seemed to stop flickering. Samuel Caldwell was dead. At the back, Dinah's hands shook. Relief surged through her, hot and sharp, but it was quickly drowned by terror. Dozens of eyes swept the square, searching for cause, for culprit. The whispers began before the body cooled. Poison. Curse. Witchcraft. And then, too soon, suspicion pointed like an arrow. The seamstress, someone muttered. She made the coat. She was there last night when Margaret fell. She reads, they say she reads. Dinah felt the weight of every gaze shift toward her. She clutched her basket, but the threads inside felt heavier than iron. Ruth's voice cut through the din, sharp with warning, "Dinah, go." But Dinah did not move. Her knees locked. For a moment she thought she might vanish into the crowd, melt into shadow. But Sarah's cry pierced the night, "Mama." And every head turned. The secret was no longer hers. Guards pushed through the crowd, lanterns swinging wild. Samuel's allies shouted for vengeance. Margaret, sobbing over her husband's body, lifted her head, eyes wild, and shrieked, "Her." She touched it last. Her hands. The crowd roared agreement. Dinah stepped forward, trembling, her face lifted to the light. She looked at Sarah one last time, memorizing the curve of her cheeks, the fear in her eyes. Then she turned back to the mob. Her voice, when it came, was low but steady. You call me seamstress. Yes. My hands made your gowns, your coats, your pride. And now my hands have undone them. Gasps rippled again. No one expected confession. No one expected a woman to speak without fear. Dinah straightened, the lamplight catching the sweat on her brow. You sold us. You sold our children. You cut families apart as easy as cloth. Tonight, the needle cut back. For a breath, silence. The square held its breath. Then chaos swallowed it, guards surged forward, shackles clanged, the crowd shouted for blood. Ruth screamed, clutching Sarah to her chest as Dinah was dragged away. Dinah did not resist. Her eyes stayed on her daughter until the crowd closed the distance. The lanterns flared against the frost, and the night itself seemed to tear open. The jail was a narrow place, cold stone and rusted iron. Dinah sat with her back against the wall, ankles chained, her hands folded in her lap. The same hands that once mended torn hems now rested still, calm as river stones. Outside, voices swelled. The town wanted blood. She did not pray for herself. She prayed for Sarah. That somehow Ruth could hide her, shield her from the ledger's ink. That when Sarah woke years from now, she would remember her mother's voice, not the crowd's rage. When the guard came for her at dawn, she rose without resistance. The rope waited in the square, thick and rough. The townsfolk gathered, pressing in close, eyes glittering with hunger. Margaret stood at the front, pale and trembling, her grief sharpened into fury. Dinah walked steady, each step measured like a stitch. At the platform, they asked for her last words. The crowd leaned forward, eager for apology, for weakness. Dinah lifted her head. Her voice carried clear, unshaken, you made me a needle. You pushed it through cloth, through flesh, through soul. You thought it only bound your world tighter. But needles can cut as well as mend. Gasps rippled. Some spat. Others lowered their eyes. She turned toward the edge of the crowd, where Ruth held Sarah close. For a moment, Sarah's gaze met hers. Wide, wet eyes, trembling lips. Dinah smiled, a small, tired smile, and mouthed a single word, live. The hood came down. The rope tightened. The platform dropped. And for a heartbeat, silence. But silence does not last. Years later, in whispers that traveled beyond Kentucky, people spoke of the seamstress who stitched death into gowns of silk. Some called her devil. Others called her martyr. To the enslaved, her name was spoken like a warning and a hope, Dinah. A woman who refused to bow, who turned her craft into resistance. On plantations, mistresses glanced nervously at their dresses. Masters eyed the seams of their coats. Trust unraveled, thread by thread. And in the memory of one little girl, hidden safely in another county, her mother's hands lived on, not as chains, not as rope, but as the steady, quiet hands that once tucked her into bed, smoothed her braids, and whispered courage into her ear. The story of Dinah does not end with the rope. It lingers in fabric, in whispers, in the fear she left stitched inside the heart of the world that tried to own her. Because cloth remembers the hand. And history, too, remembers the stitch. E2